Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Francesca Warren. We are here again with one of our top 50 educators, and we're so excited to have you here. We have Mr. Ryan Donovan here. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Francesca. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
We are more than happy to have you here. Guys, every week we try to interview a teacher, an educator who is really doing great things in the classroom. Now, as of late, we've been interviewing our top 50 educators. These are groups of people from all over the world who went through a rigorous process of not only applying for it, but having a team of educators really score their packets. And Ryan was one of our top 50 educators. Now, Ryan, before we get into anything, before we learn anything about you, I want to kind of warm it up and I want to give you a question that we get on the educators room. We just got it last night. Are you ready? Can you answer it?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So every day, guys, we get people who send us things like things they're dealing with. And so the question that we got last night is a new teacher. She says, "Hey, I'm not sure how spooked I can justify being about this, but please help me get an idea of what's happening outside of just my workplace. It's June. Grades get finalized to determine who's getting promoted to high school, retained, or sent to summer school. Then someone on the back end bumps a bunch of stuff up. Kids who are being retained now are magically passing classes. A colleague of mine gets told it's because we just can't keep that many kids back. I get told that we're in an interesting situation, but this happens every year. Every year, every time sending kids who are not ready or do not have the skills, who are testing well below grade level, who do not get the content, and who now will be unproductively struggle next year or for years to come. Have you seen this? I'm assuming this is a middle school teacher.
Mhm.
Kids are failing. They're getting pressure to pass some of the kids. Is she being dramatic? What advice would you give her?
Ooh, so to a large extent, I don't think she's being dramatic. I think a lot of teachers have been in that situation. I know I live in the high school space, and it's more so focused on graduation instead of promotion. Um, in this situation, I think that talking to whoever was in charge of bumping the grades and going over the evidence or lack therefore of evidence of learning from that student to understand why they might need more support before moving on. One of the biggest indicators of student success in high school and whether or not they graduate, because there's a ton of factors, but one of them is, do they earn the amount of credits they're supposed to freshman year? That's one of the biggest indicators of long-term success in high school, college path. So if we are sending students who don't have the tools and strategies necessary to have success at that next level, then we're setting them up for more failures. And if we're in this for all kids to make sure that they are learning at high levels and they have the skills necessary to navigate the next step, then we have to use our voice to, put a pause on this type of grade changing that is not rooted in evidence.
I love that answer. I too was a high school English teacher, and
Mhm.
there was always I taught every grade level, every course in high school in English, and
Mhm.
ninth graders usually are the ones who come in and they don't really understand you have to earn grades. They
Yeah.
struggle with that and they struggle until they're back in the same course and there's the grade 9 is on their transcript and their friends are 10th graders. And
Yeah.
so they are like floored, like, but I turned in the work, but I'm like, it wasn't right. And they don't
Yeah.
understand like turning in the work does not mean that you're gonna pass. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's where sometimes one of the big things I love talking about is grade reform.
Mm,
Because we emphasize points, students emphasize points and they don't emphasize learning. So when we give them this message of it's just about handing in work and I'll give you points, it becomes this very artificial, transactional
mm,
type of relationship that students don't see any meaning behind.
yeah.
Like you pointed out perfectly, like I handed in stuff, but if the stuff that you handed in doesn't show the skills that I need you to have, then what purpose does it actually have? Like, how does that actually show that you've learned? So I
Absolutely.
think systematically, if we start to reshape the conversations around grades as measurements of your learning and skills and not something you get for handing in stuff, then I think we'll have a better school system overall.
You know what? I can talk to you all day because this is so true. Somebody on Instagram said, I'm a middle school math teacher and I fight this every single day. Like I would always tell kids, like, you turn in an essay that is just not, it doesn't fit anything in the rubric, you're off topic, there are
Mhm.
sentence fragments everywhere. Like, you're not getting an A. You're getting go back, revise it. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting you said that because my last couple of years in the classroom, um, I got tired of the multiple choice. Like they were pushing us to give more multiple choice questions
Yeah.
for testing. And so I decided the kids were going to, their end of their assessment was always going to be essays. So I
Yeah.
started making them do essays. And when I tell you, it stopped this idea that I get makeup work for everything. I remember like a kid, like a mother coming to me and is like, oh, such and such isn't passing. I'm like, okay, so we read these books. Here were the essays they had to write. They can write the essays. And she's like, there's no like other worksheet. I was like, no. They still have to write the essay. And the mom was like, and so the kids realize, like, oh crap, I got to read this because it doesn't matter what I'm not going to give you 3 answers and multiple choice questions for you to do to show that you've mastered this content. That's not how it works.
Right. And I love that. And that's where I think a lot of teachers, we need to also hold ourselves accountable to make sure that our success criteria is extremely clear. It's in
Yes.
student-friendly language, that we show them exemplars, we grade exemplars together against a common set of standards. All that type of stuff is so meaningful for kids because then it starts to click in their brains that, oh, this is not just about writing something. It's about showing that I have the skills that my teacher expects of me.
Yeah.
And I know in my context, AP US history, so much of the test is based on rubrics. So we pick those things apart, word by word, letter by letter, comparing evidence to what the College Board considers evidence versus what students preconceive as evidence.
Mm-hmm.
All those conversations need to be part of a good classroom. And then I found that once I become more clear with my expectations, you know what goes away? The question about what is my grade and why. That question doesn't exist when you have very clear structures in place.
And so I agree. Even my parents, who I look back, they were very much everything was my fault. I stopped a lot of those conversations because up front, yeah, your child can do makeup, sure, but they're going to write these essays. And it stopped this idea of, well, my child just needs to do this to pass. No, your child needs to learn. And so I know that we're in a funky stage in education, which it may be needed for us to get to the other side, but I keep going back to teachers, we have the power. So this is high school. We're high school to high school teachers, and this is how we all operate. You're going to do this work, and if you don't, you're not going to get a passing grade. So I think younger teachers is harder because you have administrators, you have parents, you have the kids, and you don't really know how to navigate that space. But I'm with you, like, and especially AP US history, because there's a lot of reading they have to do.
Oh yeah. I mean, have so much of the test is interpreting stimuluses, whether it's a journal entry, inaugural address, or even looking at political cartoons. There's so much of that ability to infer and make connections that's necessary, that those expectations around it, what success looks like, are so important. And I guess I would say to the teacher that asked this, who's kind of new in the education space, I think the first part is getting clear about what you're measuring and making sure that you have evidence in the future to show the rationale behind it. I found that most people, when you clearly paint a picture of a body of work, not just like they turned in this or turned in that, but they're missing the ability to write a thesis. They haven't shown how to support a claim with evidence. They are missing these foundational things. Those conversations become less personalized and less about the person and more so about the evidence that's being provided.
I love this piece, and we could talk about this all day. And one of the things is like the evidence of learning. I keep going back to, as someone who taught, and people will get on here and say, oh, but you taught these type of kids. I taught in a school where kids didn't know if they were gonna go home and eat. Like it was, they didn't have a lot of resources, but my kids knew we're going to read books, we're going to write, we're going to talk about them, we're going to do grammar. It's non-negotiable. And there were always kids who were like, you know what, I'm not going to do it. Fine, then this is your grade. But I stopped a lot of, I feel like for me, the kids being able to read well, write well, talk, discuss, critically think is a social justice issue to me. So
Hmm.
if I don't teach my children how to read something and say, this may not be true. Let me go research, or I don't
Yeah.
know if this is right, or this made me think this differently, then I haven't done my job. And I know people are going to be like, it's a different time, and but I hold firmly to this because I'm like, kids leaving high school not knowing how to do those basic things it is criminal.
It is. And when we look at this from you brought up kind of the outside world. When we look at this from a nation that relies on democratic participation,
Mhm.
an informed citizenry is what allows for progress. So students need those tools to be able to look at a political ad or a speech, and they need to be able to say, well, to what extent is this true? And what evidence do we have that this person is living up to the goals that they're outlining?
Yeah.
One of the tough things, I use this example with my students. I'll take pictures of like local election signs and people running on the same thing. Like, I'm going to lower utility costs. I'm going to lower healthcare costs. I'm going to lower this. Two
Uh,
people, two different parties saying the same thing. So how do you know who to trust? And we dive into that lesson of like, let's
yeah.
look at their website, let's look at their legislative record. We look at those types of nuances to understand that in order to see if they are actually going to deliver on that, we have to look at the record and evidence of success or lack thereof.
Yeah. And I think that even what you're seeing now, like even regardless of your political leaning, people are starting to see things like it's just not true. Like
Yeah.
you've got to be able to say that. And I just think it's so critical. Okay, so we can talk about this all day. But before we get into these things, Ryan, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I just finished up my 11th year teaching. I'm originally from New York, but I started my teaching career here in Arizona. I moved out here with my amazing wife, who's super supportive. And my journey to education and teaching is probably like a lot of other people, where I was a teenager and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, right? I was that kid that bounced around. I thought I was going to be an athletic trainer at one point. Then I thought I was going to be an accountant at one point, right? Totally opposite ends of kind of the spectrum. And then I had two teachers that changed my life. Mr. Rachi was my APUS history teacher, and then Miss Mullen, who was my sociology teacher. And their classes were so engaging and so much based around critical thinking and understanding the world around us that it truly brought history to life for me. The world, the way history before that was portrayed to me to a large extent was facts and figures and understanding the importance of different people and the change they made, which is all great. But their classes brought to life that you don't have to be a passive member of the society, that activism doesn't always need to be a Martin Luther King Jr. or an Abe Lincoln or somebody enormous and famous that we look at as almost godlike. They really did a great job of highlighting how you can get involved in your local community and how you can use your voice to make positive change. And that message resonated with me so much that I felt personally like called to education to do the same thing for the next generation of students. So this is, kind of my passion. Like we can talk about this stuff all day. So it's been an amazing ride, and every day I still love showing up and teaching the next generation.
We're 6 years out of COVID. I still can't come off mute, right? Uh, I think that's amazing. And we talked about this. I can feel your passion for social studies. Like I love history, and I
Mhm.
love history because somebody ignited it in me. So to hear you say that, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And people always say, all the good teachers have left. No, they haven't. All the good teachers have
Nope.
left. A lot of us are still here. A lot of us are still doing the work. Now, so I gotta ask
Mhm.
you, it's very clear that you're passionate about your work, you're passionate about history, you're
Mhm.
passionate about kids being a part of an educated democracy.
Mhm.
So you have increased US history at your school, AP US history, by more than 400%.
Yep.
So how did that happen? Are you at a school where kids all take AP US history, or like how did you get kids today to want to take a class that many deem, not me and not you and not the people who love history, but they may deem it as boring, or do we need this, or they just don't care about history?
Right. No, I'm glad you brought this up. I love talking about it. So after my experience with APUS history, that is what I wanted to teach, right? That was ultimately my goal after I've had those teachers that changed my life. So I was lucky enough to be given the APUS history role in my school 8 years ago, and there's 41 kids total. So I had two classes, 21 and let's see, it's about 20 other kids, right? So two classes, very small for high school standards. And one of the things that I tried to do to help increase enrollment is get rid of some of the barriers and obstacles. Before I took over, there was usually like a student had to needed to have a 3.0. They needed to have letters of recommendation. There needed to be summer work. And I get why those systems existed before, but I'm trying to make a class where anyone who wants to take up the challenge is welcome. Like if you got a 1.5 GPA, but you heard my class is great and you want to step up to the plate, like I'll walk the path with you. Let's do it. Let's try it out. So I started with some things like that in terms of just like literal barriers and obstacles to participation. Then after that, I tried to make my class one of those classes where students feel excited to show up. It's not a sit and get class. It's not a read the book, answer these questions class. It's an engaged class where students' voice is heard, where discussion is the focal point. We talk about everything in my class. Very rarely is there a day where there's not some collaboration or discussion. Along with that, I try to make learning fun. Trying different review games to get people up and moving and working with people that they've never worked with before. And I think because of that, it had a snowball effect. Again, I started with 41 students, and then they told some of their friends, and then they told some of their friends. And then now, last year, I taught 168 juniors, and it's not required. And I think one of the points that you pointed out beautifully is that it's not mandated, but why are kids showing up still? Why is it all of a sudden kids just love APUS history? I don't think that's the case. I think I created really good conditions for learning and seeing value in learning. They see that me as a teacher, I'm not an adversary, I'm an advocate. We are going to go together. Like I am a huge fan of reassessments and all those things because I think that lifelong learning is an essential part of being a good person. And if you mess up the first time, like again, that kid that's never taken an AP class, showing up to my class saying, hey, I'm totally lost. Okay, let's sit down and we're going to work through this together. So they feel that and they continue to show up year after year after year. And I love it. You know, some of the people say, you know, you teach AP, you only get the good kids, right? The typical driven kids. And I still get those kids, right? I got some kids who are Ivy League bound, but I got some kids who don't know what they're going to do over the weekend, right? So like I create spaces for both those things to coexist and for those students to both feel valued in my class. So I think culture is a huge part of it.
Yeah. I love, what you said about like you created the conditions for kids to want to learn. Because I think that is something that I'm not anti-technology, but I think sometimes when we're so connected, not we as in teachers, but when systems are so connected with like, oh, putting kids on laptops or giving them these things, they miss the human connection of discussion. They miss the human connection of getting up and like being able to argue a point. And I don't mean argue a point in like today's argument where, you just scream things that aren't true, but like true debate. Like, here's how you debate. This is what you do. This is what you expect. I think that is critical. And it really makes me wonder, as you're talking about this for your school, because even if you are a high achieving student, there are kids who just are interested. Like, oh, I heard this is a cool teacher. I want to be in the class, or I want to learn. Like, they look like they're having fun. And it takes history away from being about memorization, and more about an experience, right? So
yes.
How did you make learning relevant? Like, how did you make Constitution and how are you making those things relatable, especially now where there are lots of conversations that we are in. I personally think we are in a constitutional crisis, but like, how do you teach that without getting in trouble or, feeling like, oh my God, my job is at stake, etc.
Yeah, so a few points I'll touch on here. First, when it comes to the Constitution, I love building on that point. Too often as a society, we look at this Constitution as this unbelievably perfect document made by these unbelievably perfect men that lived 200-ish years ago. But you know what I show them? to show that they didn't even think of themselves this way. Ben Franklin has a beautiful quote, and in it, he's like, "Do I agree with?" Basically, the premise is, "Do I agree with every part of the Constitution? No. Do I think it's the best option? No. But do I think it's the best for what we can do right now as a collective society? Pretty much. And we've left it open for additions so that in the future people can amend it." And that's like one of the most iconic founding fathers. Like, am I actually sure about this government? He's like, not really. So when we start looking at this as a human document made by humans that wanted it to be a malleable, flexible document that adapts to the times, kids realize that we can look at the Constitution and scrutinize it or challenge it, not in a way that makes us unpatriotic, but that makes us living up to the ideas of the founding fathers. Those founding fathers did not envision that this Constitution would remain exactly the same for the history of the country. That's why they made processes and structures to make sure that generations can change it. And I think that often gets lost in translation at times. So that's why, when constitutionally speaking, because I know APUS history deals with that a lot, I teach them that this is this living, breathing document. Why do they allow us to make amendments? Well, they figured things would need to change. So I think going at it from that angle, that it's a human document made by humans that is meant to be modified by other humans, it makes it so much more tangible. It makes it so much more realistic that when there's constitutional issues that come up, whether it's Supreme Court cases or international affairs or whatever it may be, they realize that sometimes this Constitution, because it changes, it doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. It just means it needs a software update. You know? Oh, you're on mute again.
A software update. That is such a good analogy for the Constitution, because it does make kids know that this is a live document. Mm-hmm. There will be times that we need to amend it, and this is what it looks like. What have you? So we have to talk about this. Go ahead. In this day and time where there are lots of things going to the Supreme Court, mm-hmm. We have immigrants that are being drugged into detention camps. How do you teach this? How do you teach U.S. history without parents coming for you because they feel like history should be sanitized?
Yeah, so I'm very big about providing multiple different perspectives. I'm big on activities where kids have to put themselves in the shoes of different demographics. Mm-hmm. So like, here's this Supreme Court case. How might someone from a merchant from the American Northeast respond? How might a Southern plantation owner respond? How might an enslaved person respond? So like, we look at and examine all those, especially ones rooted in history, from different lenses, with the idea that if we understand the lenses around it, we have a deeper understanding of the content knowledge we need to have success. So I think that's a huge part of it. I think helping them to understand that when it comes to, like, especially the Supreme Court, that to a large extent, it's dictated by who is interpreting the Constitution, those 9 justices. What are their backgrounds? What are their beliefs? Like, when we look at the late 1800s, with terrible cases like Plessy versus Ferguson, a lot of those guys don't have backgrounds in social issues. A lot of them are former corporate lawyers who became Supreme Court justices. So they look at it as a lens through just economics. And we're not trying to blame or shame them. We're largely just trying to show that they come in with a preconceived set of notions and beliefs about what society looks like, and that impacts their decision making. So when we paint a picture of who these people are and why they might act this way or why they might behave this way, I think students then get a better picture of trying to seek to understand instead of seeking to point the blame or try to judge someone. So does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense, because I think that is a great way. And, even when I know that it's probably the norm now, but back when I was teaching, we would always work on synthesis essays. And I know in U.S. history, it used to be DBQs. Do you guys DBQs?
Yes, we do.
You want kids to be able to get all perspectives and then to make an intelligent, like, have a response that is able to weave in all different opinions and go from there. So it really, I guess I'm still on the right track on what we do in U.S. history. But yeah, that is a fundamental part, I think, of our democracy. Now, are you getting kids in your classes? Or are you noticing that kids are coming with less knowledge, just coming to the class, not leaving, about how America works? I feel like I've had to, in the last 10 years, explain to people like the branches of government and what's supposed to happen and what's not supposed to happen. Like, are you
Yeah.
noticing that?
To some degree, as I make this class more accessible, I am seeing more students who haven't taken maybe rigorous course loads or who come from different states. There's so many different variables that go into a classroom context, right? But systematically, I think one of the big things why you might be feeling that, and I've experienced it too, is that they keep cutting social studies instruction time in lower grades. I don't think it's a kid problem. I don't think it's a teacher problem. I think it's a systemic problem where, you know what gets cut the first in elementary and middle school?
Mm-hmm.
Social studies instruction time. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's not a teacher fault. No
Mm-hmm.
blame on teachers at all. I understand that you live within the system. You have a certain set of curriculum you're supposed to develop. I get it. We all get those pressures. But I think systematically, the more that we continue to say, oh, well, we used to have 60 minutes for social studies. Now it's 40, or we're just going to pair it with language arts and then call it good there. Those two things do intersect. However, without dedicated social science time, especially at the younger grades, we're going to continue to run into those problems as educators. So we really need to hold the K through 12 system up to a critical lens and say, where are students getting dedicated social sciences time? Otherwise, we're going to keep running into this problem as educators, and it's going to make the weight of what we do a little bit heavier.
You know what? This is I don't so I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I believe that the lack of social studies, the systematic, this is not just one state, one school system, but the lack of social studies systematically that's been taken out in K-12 was intentional. And I know that many times districts made a choice because ELA and math are tested.
Mhm.
But I think from a lens of just shifts, I wonder, let me say this, I wonder if it's intentional, um, so that kids are not able to understand democracy and how it works. But it's not just kids, it's adults. So
Yeah.
I've met adults who don't understand what the executive, the legislative, the judicial branches do. And so it impacts their understanding of things that are happening. So you are right. And what do you, because people are going to listen to this and say, okay, well, my school says I only have to teach social studies 20 minutes a week. As a high school AP US history teacher, what is the sweet spot? I think kids should get social studies every day. What do you think? I think he might have. Hold on, guys. We might be going through a little. Okay, you're back. Did you hear what I said?
Sorry, I froze for a second. The last part you said how much, something along the lines of how much time should we dedicate in the earlier grades to social
Social,
studies instruction?
yeah, social studies instruction.
I think at least an hour or more a week as at least to start. And even if it's just, maybe it's when I look at history, I think of it so much in themes. When we talk about community contributions, start with your local farmer who helps to put food on the table for people. Talk about how your principal helps to enforce the rules. Start with those basic things that the kids see every day. Like, why do we even have rules or laws to begin with? You ever ask a student, like, why do we think we have this rule in place? And they just give you a blank stare, or they tell you because the teacher told you to. If we even start like those basic things at the elementary school level, where they start to think about the community around them, the systems around them in place, why they exist, then it'll be easier to build off that knowledge and say, okay, you've learned about rules, laws, you've learned about how people make change in their community. Now we're going to widen the lens to look at the state level, and then we're going to go to the national level, then we're going to go to the international level. So I think those conversations around just general themes, in terms of what the social sciences is and social studies are, can really help this K through 12 system shift towards making legitimately informed citizenry, not this inauthentic one where we teach them about the founding fathers, we teach them about the Constitution, here's a bunch of facts, move on. That we teach them that community contributions don't always need to come from somebody else. It doesn't always need to just be one leader. When we look at grassroots activism, that's one of the most powerful tools used in the history of our country to make legitimate change.
I'm glad that you said that, because what I've also noticed in a shift is, and I get it, there's no longer social studies books in K-5. There's consumables. So guys, in the comments, if you're listening, let us know, are you seeing social studies books? Because I don't see it in my kids' classroom. I see a consumable where they learn a little excerpt and then they answer questions, right? And
Hmm.
I'm like, I remember we used to get the weekly readers where it was like
Hmm.
events and kids would talk about them. And so for me, I'm like, that is missing. History is not just learn these facts and we're good. It is literally us going through and learning about what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
So I love that you how you talk about how it needs to be incorporated at least an hour. And I say pre-K five, like
Yeah.
pre-K five kids need to get enough social studies.
Right. And I think there is so much overlap between these different disciplines that if it needs to be um, if it needs to be built into previously established standards, there are ways to do that. And it's not easy work. And I think teachers need the time and space to do that. That's why I'm a huge advocate of professional learning communities and dedicated time during the school day and contract hours where teachers can have these conversations and build the resources needed to do it. I think is so important because doing this type of work on your own is not easy and it can be very time consuming. But I think yeah, imagine how powerful it is if you had a city council member come in or someone on your governing board to talk to kids to realize like these are the local people around you. These are the people you might see at the grocery store who are working to make changes in the world around you. So I think those types of initiatives need to be brought back more to the K-6 space, especially because if we have a generation of kids who don't learn the tools about how to talk about politics, you know, that old phrase, like you never talk about politics and religion with people, right? But then because we said those things, we have now created the system where politics has become divisive and so, so sometimes petty and angry. So no wonder kids become disillusioned with politics because anytime it brings it up, it turns into a fight at the family dinner table at Thanksgiving, right? So we need to give them tools from early on how to have academic discourse in a way that's constructive and one that's focused not on winning and losing, but on learning. I think that's the core of kind of my message. You're muted again.
I'm
There we
muted.
go.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and like politics has become divisive. And I also think part of that is because kids are right, they're not seeing politics, nobody's talking about anything, no one knows how to have a conversation. And
Yeah.
then on the flip side of that, politicians know this, so they know that if I'm a city council person, I can promise that something that's not even in my control, but I can promise it because people don't understand that. And
Yeah.
so now people are like, well, you said this. Well, that's out of my control. We don't have, but people don't know what they don't know. So I think that is huge for that. Okay. That's a whole nother and we're going to talk about this because you have your students engaged in a lot of things, right? Like the
Mhm.
Civic Center, the Hope Women's Center of Phoenix, the, veterans organizations. How do you how did you manage to get community partnerships in part of your social studies curriculum? Because some people don't make the connection
Yeah.
and they're like, no, social studies is just take notes and that's all you do. And then you take tests. So, how did you make those connections?
Yeah, so a variety of different ways. First, for the Anthem Veterans Organization, I had the head of it, Liz Turner, reach out to me and say, hey, we're doing this Veterans Day celebration in Anthem. We would like to make some thank you cards for local veterans. Would you be interested? And I brought it to my department, and the answer was a resounding yes. So we found ways to get National Honor Society involved, the art department involved, all of these different community members to see that, hey, this is a moment to celebrate those who have um, dedicated a part of their life to protecting the freedoms that we sometimes all unfortunately take for granted, right? All of us included. So we set out on a mission to make as many thank you cards to honor our veterans. And it became this one where students now, when we learned about wars and we learned about the effects of war, they're not just seeing numbers, they're thinking of people they made cards for. So it seemed like a seamless transition for me. And we've been the community in Anthem has been so amazing. We've given out over 8,000 thank you cards to veterans in the last 5 years. And that's a testament to the idea of rallying around behind an idea and supporting our community.
Yeah.
When it comes to the other organizations, one of the other ones not brought up, the League of Women Voters. I partner with them a lot. They have a branch in Northwest Maricopa County. That's where our school is. And we've had them come and do voter registration drives. This year, they're pitching a student ambassador program for students who are interested in politics. And as a nonpartisan organization, it feels safer for students. This is not a Republican Party. This is not a Democratic Party. It's a nonpartisan one that's focused on protecting democratic institutions and making sure that people are informed citizens when they go to vote, not only on state and national, but more so local elections. So kids realizing that my juniors, you're going to vote in a year. Where are you going to get your information from? How are you going to know what good information looks like? So again, I see that as a seamless transition. And then last but not least, the Civic Center was actually by some ambitious students who wanted to get more civically engaged, and they helped and collaborated. And one of the things I'm most proud of, this was years ago, we used to have young Republicans and young Democrats. This was probably like 6 years ago. We don't have those organizations anymore. But the student got trained on the Civic Center on how to have a student-led voter registration drive, and then collaborated with young Democrats and Republicans. So both of them were at the table getting kids registered, and they agreed on, we're not selling a party. We are not going to talk about our own beliefs, our own registration. We are simply just trying to get the word out about democracy. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've seen as a teacher. We can't even get sometimes our congressional representatives to come across the aisle for a common idea, but our 17 and 18-year-old kids with pre-established different political views were able to. So those types of things help kids to understand the compromise that comes with a massive federal system where you have 50 different states and so many different interests involved. So I see it as a seamless transition between those different ideas.
It's so interesting that you said that, because we have April. Hey, April, she is from Texas. She says, in Texas, we are warned against these conversations. We are very, very red. There's nothing like kids learning about the Vietnam War to them speaking to somebody who's actually was in the war.
Mm-hmm.
And them saying, and them telling you that, no, this is what it was like. No, this is why I was for or against it, or this is what it cost me. That is a real life history lesson.
Yeah.
I remember when I taught, we used to have Holocaust survivors come. We would go to the Jewish Museum and we would listen to them.
Yeah.
And you talk about something that kids, oh my God, this is real. So I completely agree. Getting registered to vote, learning about the topic, student-led, doing those things, it's just become so divisive. It's become so, and it's not the kids, it's the adults. The kids are fine. The kids you can manage. It's the adults when they get involved and, and want to flex their power. And so for somebody like April who says, I'm in Texas, this is such a problem. I mean, if I was April, and April, I'm not telling you to do this, you can teach about gerrymandering, right? Texas is a huge state. And so there's a lot of people with different beliefs, but because sometimes how the districts are cut up, people wouldn't know that. So what advice would you give her who's saying, I love these ideas, but we can't even have conversations like this anymore?
Yeah, this is a great question. A couple things I want to point out here. First, generally speaking, one of the things I think about often is if educators don't train students to have difficult conversations, then who will? Because that is a very challenging skill. And as a parent, right, I got 2 kids. Sometimes it's harder to have those conversations with your own kids. Sometimes it's easier to come from an objective other adult to navigate those types of things, especially in an academic setting. And other things that you can look at in terms of advice to April, root it in the standards and root it in what skills you are trying to produce. Because in my class, like the AP level, I have more flexibility maybe than others, but there are specific standards about debates over the institution of slavery, debates over why was the institution of slavery not included in the Constitution. There are already those things pre-described. So if you can find a way to tie it to, here's what we're learning, here's why, here's the skill and standard this is going to meet, and it's rooted in sound instructional practice, those go a long way in helping parents, administrators, or other district admin to understand why you're doing it. So I hope that advice helps.
One of the things that I also tell educators is, as I always go to the polls and I look at my state legislators, I'll just use them as an example. One of the questions that I always have for them is like, how do you treat public schools? Like, what is your belief on public schools? And
Mm-hmm.
anybody who I don't believe is a public school supporter will not get my vote, and will not get the vote of people that I care about, that ask me who to vote for. And so one of the things that I think is important, and we've done this a couple of times, is elected officials always love to come and speak to young people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've had our kids do is say, how do you feel about this? The rewriting
Yeah.
of history, the this, the that, the this, and they have to be put on notice for that. So April said it does help her, but I also, want to encourage people to. These state legislators many times are elected every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to come around and they're going to ask for your vote. I want to know, are you going to try to rewrite our standards so that we don't teach this or we don't teach that? Those are things I need to know so that I can make a good decision, because social studies is fundamental to our state of democracy.
Yeah.
It is fundamental. So if you have somebody who's already running on, we're not going to teach this and we're not going to teach that, I always question, well, why don't you want it taught?
Yeah, and I think that the idea of shame comes up a lot, or blaming, or guilt. But when I've used this phrasing before earlier in the webinar here, but we're just trying to understand the human experience. Humans are inherently flawed. And when we point out that they're flawed, we're not pointing out that they're flawed for the sake of judgment. We're pointing out they're flawed to help us identify with the fact that they are human. And when we understand that these are human decisions with human errors embedded with it, it becomes less of the finger pointing game, and it becomes more about understanding how we've gotten to this point in the world. So when I think about taking on difficult topics in the social studies classroom, I try to use it from a very human lens. These are humans making decisions based on their own preconceived notions and experiences. And let's try to understand the why behind it. And if there's a lesson to be learned about, oh, we definitely don't want to see this, or we hope that in the future this will change. Mm-hmm. That's part of the process. Like celebrating America 250. I did a project with my students at the end of the year after the AP test. In the question, there's a couple different questions they could pick from, like big thematic questions. And one of them is, when we celebrate America 275, what do you hope has changed by that point and why? And it wasn't, you had to pick a certain topic. It was whatever you think needs to happen in order for America to try to live up to the lofty goals of our Declaration, right? Mm-hmm. All people being created equal. Yep. They are bound to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. What steps do we need to take as a society to make sure that we get closer and closer to that goal? Because will we ever reach that goal? Of course not. That's a perfect goal, right? And we are humans and we are not perfect. But how can we continue to make strides towards that goal that was set forth 250 years ago?
Yep. I think that's so important. I've been watching the 250. PBS has had some really good documentaries out about all kinds of things. And I love that, because yes, America is a great place to be. Even without all our flaws. Like I've traveled overseas many, many times. And when I hit home, I'm like, the United States. I'm home. But we also have some things that we have to reckon with, right? And PBS has done a great job in those documentary pieces. So I appreciate that you're talking about that. And we've talked about, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, one of my favorite phrases that I learned is that truth is not afraid of evidence. And when we hold ourselves up to that, and again, reckoning doesn't mean assigning blame. Reckoning means, here is something we wish not to repeat, or here's how we want to move forward. Like, that's all we're looking for as social studies educators. We're not telling you to join a political party. I know that gets thrown out a lot. We're not telling you that you have to vote this way. Right. We just want you to be self-aware and be like, what do I want to see in the world, and how can I act accordingly to that? Yeah. When our students do that, they start to see the idea that their voice matters, that their ideas matter, and that they can use that. Because not everyone's going to be a history teacher, but I expect everyone to be a citizen, a contributing citizen, whether it's voting, volunteering, advocating for other people, whatever it may be. I expect all my kids to graduate with the idea that they can make a positive difference in their world.
Absolutely. And I love that quote. I put it on the screen. Truth is not afraid of evidence. I'm sure our social media team will be pulling that and putting a photo of you on there, Ryan. But
That
it's
sounds good.
right. Like people, and we joke about this all the time. Like teachers are indoctrinating students. I don't see that. If we want to indoctrinate students, I'm going to indoctrinate our kids to like wear deodorant, like work, like get off your phone. Like I don't care if you vote how I vote. I honestly don't.
Right.
What I do care about is that you can critically think.
Yeah.
You are an adult and that you can say, this doesn't sound right. Let me research. Or
Yeah.
you know the difference between AI and human, right? Or human work, or that you know that something isn't right. I need to rethink this, because that is the key to a democracy, right? You don't
It
want
is.
kids who just are robots and do exactly what we say. So I agree.
Yeah.
This idea, this myth that teachers are indoctrinating students. No, what they're doing is giving them all options, and kids are
Yeah.
making their own decisions. So I do love that. One of the things that, and we have about 15 more minutes. We could talk to Ryan forever, even an hour. We talked to how schools can better prepare students to be, informed, active parts of their democracy. But let's talk a little bit, because you are a gifted educator and an AP teacher. How do you keep your class inclusive, right? So I have a child who has dyslexia, and I had to go and like fight. She's graduating now, but when she was in elementary, I had to fight for her to get into certain classes, right? Honors classes, those type of things. But everybody doesn't have a parent like you or I. So how do you make sure that your class stays inclusive and kids who want to be part of the experience can be a part of it?
Yeah, so for the people who weren't earlier, one of the big things they pointed out was eliminating barriers and obstacles. So you don't need a certain GPA to join my class, no recommendations, no certain GPA. So that's just kind of a refresher. But I think one of the other elements of inclusivity is the idea that I allow for reassessments and revisions and all this different type. And I know that kind of goes into grading, but to me, that's so inclusive and so accessible. When students realizing that failing the first time is not fatal, that it's not final, that learning is this continuous struggle towards enlightenment, that I can be there with them to help them to get to the point they're trying to go to. I think that speaks so much to inclusivity. So I find that the reassessments and revisions and all those things are the tool to include students to make sure that all students achieve proficiency. Another great phrase that I've learned recently is that I don't lower standards, but I can lengthen them, right? It might take you 3 tries to get there. Some of the other kids might take 1, but that's okay. You're still going to get there. I will adapt, modify, and differentiate to make sure that no one is left behind. And at the end of the day, one of my favorite things is like at the end of the year when seniors graduate, I get those letters, like all of us teachers do at the end of the year. And one of my favorite comments is that, the kids can largely see that I care about them and I care about their success. And they're like, one of my favorite phrases from a student named Paige, he wrote a letter that said, "You make everyone feel so seen and it's so beautiful." And when I read that, I'm like tearing up in my classroom by myself, right? And I was like, that speaks to the idea of inclusivity. Every kid feels seen, they feel valued, they feel cared for. They know every day I show up and they're like, man, Mr. Donovan loves his job. Sometimes I get a little long-winded, I get on my tangents about history, right? But I try to rein it in and they acknowledge that. But the fact they see valued no matter where they come from, their background, their prior AP experiences, their GPA, their accolades or lack therefore of, that they feel seen, speaks to the idea of inclusivity. All kids are welcome in my class. And if you struggle academically, personally, like I'm going to be on your team. I'm going to be in your corner every step of the way, and we're going to figure this out together.
I love that. And I feel like it's so clear to me just interviewing you that like there's a reason why you are the teacher of the year of your school district, and now you're a finalist for Arizona Teacher of the Year. I can feel it, just like your exuberance and like just your passion for teaching children. What lessons have these experiences taught you about education?
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned a lot with these accolades, including the top 50 trailblazing educator from your amazing organization, is that in order to, you don't.
I think it's gone. Hold on. Let's see if it is.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yes.
Um, I've been working with the Arizona K-12 Center a lot as part of their Teacher Solutions team, which is a collection of instructional coaches, administrators, teachers from all over the state of Arizona, and we presented the Teacher Leadership Institute that just passed a couple weeks ago. And our mantra is lead from where you are. And I think that's so powerful because yes, administrators, superintendents are leaders. Of course, they deal a lot with them. Shout out to them. I know their job's not easy. But I also think there's power in teachers realizing that they can lead legitimate change within their space. They can have the influence on other people, the connections, the networking. All those things I think is one of the biggest lessons I've learned, that I don't need to go become a superintendent to lead real change in my community. I can lead from where I'm at right now and shape not only a generation of teachers or a generation of students, but a whole department and school of teachers who see what I'm doing and they're interested and they want to try to embed these in their classroom. So having those conversations and those collaborations allows me to do what I love, which is teach students, but also grow my leadership network as I continue on this path of self-reflection and growth. I like to say that I stand on the shoulders of all the amazing educators I've worked with before me, and I'm going to continue to honor their legacy by continuously learning and being a better version of myself each and every year.
I appreciate that. And, I think that this is a lesson for teachers who are watching this, who are saying, sometimes there's this belief as teachers, like, we don't need the accolades, but the accolades, we don't need them, but the accolades and are about the experiences. The experiences, they put you in a way, they help you grow. And so I always recommend to people who are like, oh, I don't need the accolades. I'm like, no, 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 no. Go ahead and toot your horn. Like, you
Yeah.
don't shy away from being in the spotlight, because I think that's one of the reasons that sometimes great educators don't get recognized, because we've been taught to just work with our heads down, and that's not how the real world works.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I
Go ahead.
love that. I was going to just say, I love that idea because when I first started all these processes and applications and things that came my way, I had that same initial, like, this is not what I do it for. Like, it's cool, but it's not why I do it. But I realized that as the platforms start to open up and you share your experiences, it creates a bigger community of teachers and educators who feel connected. Like the fact that I'm in Arizona and you're in Georgia and we're having this conversation today, and there's people from Texas watching.
Yeah.
What a beautiful community of learners and idea generation that can help us to be better people every day. So for those who are struggling, or maybe they've been nominated this, oh, I'm not going to do it this year.
Yeah.
I challenge you to do it, even if it's not good. I look back at my first applications and I'm like, man, those were terrible.
Yeah.
But you learn a lot about yourself. You really do. Writing is this beautiful way to learn more about who you are and who your identity is as either a person or a teacher. So for those who are hesitant, take the leap. It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel awkward, but you will find out and you'll have a chance to recognize the amazing things that you already do. Like at the end of the applications I've done, I was like, wow, sometimes we get lost in the weeds and days are tough, but
Yeah.
I do my very best to help kids every day. And, that means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. What gives you hope about the future of teaching and learning?
This is kind of a new space I've kind of explored recently. I love working with people who are thinking about becoming teachers. I had my first student teacher a couple of years ago, which was such a rewarding experience. I think I learned and grew just as much as she did in that. I've been on a panel at different local community college talking about my career path and why I chose education. This Friday, I'll be working with a nonprofit, Camp Katniss, which is an amazing organization. And I'll be speaking to kids who are interested in becoming educators. And I think in order to build the next generation of really good teachers and learners, we have to get teachers with great experience and passion and love for this work to encourage them that, yeah, it's going to be difficult. Yeah, there are going to be challenges, but it's one of the most rewarding careers that anyone can ever experience. You leave a legacy, and it's kind of like, when you skip a rock into the ocean, right? Like you see the ripples immediately, but it keeps rippling on and you may never see it, but there's a small piece of you that knows that 10 years down the road, some kids are going to be at a high school reunion and be like, oh, do you remember Mr. Donovan's class? That was the best. And that your legacy of what you do to change lives will live on even when you don't see it or hear it.
Absolutely. Now, I have two more questions to ask. We have
Yep.
6 minutes left.
Okay.
People have been leaving their comments, but if every student left your classroom with one lasting lesson, and I want to talk about like content, like if they like, what is the one lesson in U.S. history that you think every kid should understand, know, be able to talk about, etc.?
So from the content standpoint, I think it's the idea that our nation is built on people who collectively work together to make positive change forward. I think that when they look at the grassroots activists of the civil rights era, the second wave of feminism, all those different social movements, there's so much power in that. These people aren't elected officials. They are farm workers. They are preachers and priests. They are all these different, they're writers, they're journalists, they're all these different facets of America that are needed in order to propel our country forward. So that's why I'm so passionate about activism as a general topic in journalism that's rooted in bringing together people from different demographics to unite around a common cause or belief or value. I hope content-wise, they realize that kids have more power than they think.
I love it. Okay, last question, guys. Last question. Tomorrow you wake up and you are the Secretary of Education. You have all the power that comes with it, all the resources. What's your initiatives going to be? What are you going to do first, second, third? What are you going to be known for?
Okay, do you have another hour? I'm just kidding. So I'll hit on 2 big points. One I've hit on before. First, mandated K through 12 protected instructional time for social studies in giving teachers tools to do this in an authentic way, not just here's a textbook run, right? Authentic, focused on academic discourse and how debates don't need to be winner losers, that if we structured our debates as learning opportunities, we would be much better off as a society because we would listen to learn, not listen to respond. So that would be one of my big initiatives. The second one would be grading reform. Too often, especially in the secondary space I live, kids are focused on grades and points. They're focusing on what hoop do I have to jump through for this teacher in order to get the grade I want and move on. We wonder why kids don't learn things for the long term. How many times have kids taken a test and you ask them 10 minutes after the test what they talked about and they have blanks there? No idea. That's pressure from grades. That's pressure to just perform for the sake of a test. So I would completely change and reform the grading system. It would be, you can use evidence-based, competency-based, standards-based. Educators, myself included, love jargon, right? We love a million different acronyms to describe the same system. But clearly articulating, here are the skills kids need to have before they move on to the next grade. Here's how we're going to revise, reassess, and make sure that kids get there. Here are the supports that we need to make sure that if kids don't get it, we have interventionists or coaches or people that can help them get it and then move on. The 0 to 100% system is one of the most toxic elements of, especially again, high school space. I know K through 5, it's not as big a deal, but I've even talked to 3rd grade teachers because in Arizona, we have state testing in 3rd grade and their kids are coming up with test anxiety and worrying about grades as 3rd graders. You know what 9-year-olds should be worried about? Like playing outside with their friends and like enjoying summer. And they should focus still on the idea of loving learning for the sake of loving learning. So if we get rid of that stigma by time 0 to 100, and we get rid of that system and we focus more on what are the evidence of learning you showed, and we let kids fall in love with learning and curiosity and exploring the depths of the topic, I think those 2 things would help to make it a better informed citizenry, and kids would not see school as something done to them, as something for them. And I guess I'll leave it at this because I know we only got a minute left. I think that last one I talked about grading reform and the focus on deep inquiry-based learning in the classroom, that's a big way to solve the chronic absentee problem we're seeing. Because kids don't see something as learning that's done in the technology space. Yeah. They see it as something they do something they do and collaborate with their friends and their teachers with.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is a great way. And I can't wait till you become Secretary of Education. Ryan, is there anything that we did not cover that you want to talk about?
No, and for those who are interested more in my journey, you can follow me on LinkedIn at Ryan Donovan. or Instagram. It's Ryan_J_Donovan. I post about the things I'm doing, and I love to welcome to the space and connect.
We thank you for your time today. This was an amazing interview. Guys, please, we are going to send it out, but please, you can check all the Educators Room social media on YouTube, on LinkedIn. This will be streamed there. I see why you are a stellar educator, and just keep going. And I can't imagine how amazing you're going to, even more amazing you're going to be in another 10 years. So thank you, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Francesca. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me on and giving voice to all those educators out there.
Absolutely. Guys, please like, share this with somebody who needs to know this, all these information that we've shared, and join us this Friday. This Friday, we are having a panel discussion about all the changes with the Department of Education, and the movement of Special Education Department to the Health and Human Services. So join us for our dynamic panel. It is going to start at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, Ron. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.